Hey, what's up? This is Wilsifer with Abysmal Hymns, and I got Reza Mills back with me. And as promised, we are counting down our personal top five punk albums of the 80s. And some of these artists, and maybe even some of the albums, might have come up in some of our past episodes. But I mean, I think the one thing I like about doing this kind of 80s series is that it was, a pretty crucial time for me as far as like when I was forming my sense of music. Before the 80s, I mean, I was a little kid, so I only liked Kiss and Alice Cooper. So this was like a expansion into what my tastes are today. Um, So it's not going to be a surprise that some of these names might have come up before because they're artists that have stuck with me over the years. Um, Particularly when you're talking about the 80s. I mean, that's, 40 years down the line. So they've definitely stood the test of time. It's always weird for me when I hear artists from the 80s referred to as classic rock, but I guess that's where we're headed. So I think these guys and gals in some cases, um, you know, made the transition from early punk, which I always say punk started in 69 with the Stooges and
Yep.
MC5
Agree.
and how it transitioned because the 80s was a weird transitional time for like music in general, not just punk, because of MTV came in and commercialized everything.
Yep.
So it was a case of how do you adapt to this? And a lot of them, I think maybe of mine, I've seen two of these on MTV. So a lot of them had to adapt, and some of them, I think that one of my picks is going to be a band that I think kind of transitioned into their final form. Um, but yeah, so these albums have stood the test of time, and I think they're important for the time that they came out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this was an interesting one to do actually, because one thing I tried to resist doing was having any hardcore in there, because I feel like, I mean, like you, I've been listening to that genre for God knows. I mean, in my case, nearly 25, 26 years. So I feel like we've dealt with that enough for now on this show. So I tried to choose some from the punk scene and some kind of ones that people wouldn't necessarily associate with me, possibly. So it was good fun in that respect, just choosing ones that are punk in essence, but have some different flavors about them. And for that reason, I've been really looking forward to this. This should be a good show.
Yeah, you want to kick us off with your first pick?
I surely will. So let's go back to 1980 and one of my favorite LA punk bands, of course, take your pick, but I really love the band X, and the album I'm going for is Los Angeles, which was their full-length debut. One thing I love about these guys, it was like it's like the vocal harmonies between Exene Cervenka and John Doe. At the time, they were a couple, and then you had this weird sort of rockabilly type dude on guitar called Billy Zoom, who was God, he was born in the late 40s, so he's a bit older than the rest of the band. And they were hugely influenced by the Doors as well. In fact, there's a very killer version of Soul Kitchen on this album. And it's a record that was produced by the late, great Ray Manzarek, too. It's just got tons of melody, so it kind of retains, in a way, what that first wave of punk brought, in some ways from the UK and the US, but also gave it a bit more of an edge because obviously these guys would have been on the same scene as like the Germs and the Dills and the Bags and all those great bands, and they were kind of like in a way. Kind of a precursor to hardcore, but they were never hardcore. I want to make that very clear. But they clearly would have had some impact on those bands. And yeah, I've always been a huge fan of these guys. And for me, this is probably one of the best. If you want to like have a summation of what LA must have been like in 1980, just put on this record. It's absolutely amazing. So X and their album Los Angeles.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, with X, and that's probably my favorite album by those guys too. They cover a lot of ground. You know, you got the kind of rockabilly thing going on. You have I wouldn't call it post-punk, but some of it heads in that direction.
Sure.
Because it's a lot more melodic than what we typically think of as being punk.
Mm,
With that said, I think that in the 80s, a lot of punk bands and not hardcore bands moved in a more melodic direction, back to kind of the crossroads where they split off from rock and roll back when the genre started.
yeah.
Um, and I think that X pretty much encapsulates that.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And all their albums are definitely worth checking out, I'd say. They did go into a bit of a I guess you would call it alt country, or what was then becoming alt country. Alongside bands like Rank and File and some of the Paisley Underground people. So there is that kind of side to them too, like the softer side. But yeah, there's definitely more melodic than maybe some of the other choices on here. But if you want really beautiful, amazing harmonies and really just excellent songwriting. I think in a way it transcends punk. I think you listen to it, yes, it's got the energy, but it's also got the musical chops too. These guys were solid. So yeah, just an all-round great album and a great band. So
Right, and I think that a lot, I know on my list, and I guess I could say it for X too, a lot of these bands you have to think about when this came out in the early 80s. What started here would gradually become and evolve into what the 90s would call alternative rock.
yeah.
And that's where I think the current runs through.
Mm,
Whether those bands stayed, I guess, punk by what, someone with a mohawk pissing on the sidewalk would call it. I don't know. But I think that you can see how it influenced the music to come.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, my first pick is not necessarily going to be known for being melodic, but they're from the other coast, which is weird because I didn't realize they were from New York or upstate New York until I started doing the research. It never really clicked. I guess I thought they were from space. I'm not really sure. But the album came out in 1981, and it's a band that kind of fell between the cracks, I think, as far as like, even though they formed in 77, you never think of them as being part of that early New York punk scene.
Yeah.
Because there was a good dose of metal in what they did.
Yeah.
And that band is the Plasmatics. And I'm going with the album Beyond the Valley of 1984,
Cool.
which is an album I think is way ahead of its time. I think these guys don't get enough credit. Wendy O. Williams was,
Yeah.
you know, there's been in recent years a push, I think, um, to really publicize female-fronted punk and metal bands, which
Mm,
is fine, but it's nothing new. I mean, Wendy O. Williams was doing it, and back in these days. So. And I don't know if anybody has really done it as well as her since. So
yeah. No, great band. Strange band as well. If you look at their image, like there's a video on YouTube of them playing that track Butcher Baby. It's just the weird. One guy's wearing a gimp mask, the other guy's got some fucked up mohawk. You got Wendy in her quite revealing clothing, I guess, chainsawing a car. I mean, to think of it, I mean, it sounds dreadful, but actually, the music is really, really good. So, yeah, I
right.
have a soft spot. And there is in a way, I suppose you could say they were the kind of the original crossover band because they certainly appealed to not only the punks, but also rockers, metalheads, whatever. And of course, I think, didn't she do a duet with Lemmy as well?
Right, yeah. And I think they toured with Motorhead. And I think they toured with more. metal bands than they did punk bands,
Yeah.
maybe. Just because they had, a crazy show that was
Yeah.
going on, where punk at that point in time was not really about that. I think that that was what it was kind of raging against was the more theatrical elements of bands like Judas Priest. Whereas the Plasmatics kind of embraced that. And I get, as a little kid, when
Yeah.
I became aware of them, I was like, what the hell is this? She looks like she's from the Road Warrior and she's taking a sledgehammer to a car.
Yeah.
I could get behind that. So
Sure.
they
Yeah.
made an
I mean,
impression with me, and I think that it was an easier jump from into punk rock from Alice Cooper to the Plasmatics than it would have been if I went from Alice Cooper to, you know, Flipper or whoever.
that makes sense. Yeah. And, basically, if anyone wants to know what a plasmatic sounds like, imagine Mad Max put to music.
Right.
Uh, it's post-apocalyptic.
But the
The
80s version of
the
post-apocalyptic.
80s version, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the dudes, he's got a French name. I can't remember his name now, but I think he also did some songwriting stuff with the Ramones as well.
Right.
I can't remember his name. I think he was the bassist, but name escapes me at the moment. So there is kind of a connection there with punk in a way, and certainly in terms of attitude, but they weren't afraid, as you say, to embrace that more flamboyant, theatrical element, which, of course, in punk and then of definitely hardcore was something that was a big no-no. So yeah, good choice.
Cool. All right. What you got?
All right, so this is a record from a band called the Dead Boys. It's actually a live record, Night of the Living Dead Boys, because their two albums came out in the 70s. So I sort of had to get this one over the line. It's got one of my favorite frontmen in punk, I would say, Stiv Bators. And if you want to hear where the Bad Brains got their inspiration, it's these dudes. I mean, just listen to Sonic Reducer, especially the version that's on this and then listen to the early Bad Brain stuff, and it's like, wow, okay, I get it. The aggression and everything. And this live album was quite interesting because he purposefully didn't sing into the microphone at the show, so the vocals were a bit sort of overdubbed. I mean, it's kind of gotten a bit of flack for that reason, but while the albums were good, I think this record certainly captures the true chaos of the band. And I think obviously I'm not going to give anything away, but there's kind of a Stiv Bators connection later on in the show, I believe. But yeah, I definitely always had a soft spot for the Dead Boys, kind of like I guess the children of the Stooges in essence, very Iggy inspired. So yeah, that's my choice. The live album, Night of the Living Dead Boys.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Dead Boys. There is, the thing about them is that where they did kind of evolve from what the Stooges were doing and what, I guess even the New York Dolls to a sense, I would kind
Sure.
of connect them sonically to the New York Dolls. Um, being from Cleveland, they had a different influence than if they were from New York.
Yep.
While they would not be a stranger to clubs like CBGB's, um, they were kind of doing their own thing. And it was more rock and roll, I think, than a lot of the bands coming out of New York. So, yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, can't go wrong with them. In fact, you said a little later, but it's just going to be right now.
That's good. Well timed.
My
Somewhat
the
unintentional.
stiff Bader train will keep on rolling. I am gonna go with, and I've been doing mine in chronological order too. So this one is gonna be from 1982, and it's a band that he fronted called Lords of the New Church.
Oh,
And it's their self-titled first album, which also features members of The Damned, Sham 69, and the Barracudas.
mm.
And you can hear the influence of all of those bands
That's
in
a
what they
motley
do.
crew, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I guess if you were gonna say what were the essence of what they did, I would say it would be like Stiff Bader's fronting The Damned,
Yeah.
but more punk, you know. Even
Sure.
though there's a lot, even the album after this continues down a darker path. There's some melodic moments on this, and they were they're a band that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I remember them being very much in the forefront of my consciousness when I got into punk rock. I had a friend who was the first guy that I knew that was into it, and he had a cramps patch for Stay Sick on his leather jacket with the Lords of the New Church patch kind of over it.
Hmm.
So I was always like thought that they were somehow connected, and and I think it covered up the word the cramps with Lords of the New Church. So I thought that that was what one of their album covers looked like, but it was not. So although it could have been.
Yeah.
Um, I think that although they weren't played a lot on MTV, they kind of helped punk cross over into that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the Dead Boys could have done it, and I don't think they were ready for the Damn Jet either. So this vehicle, to the best of my knowledge, but even though now we think of them as more having more of a cult following, they were a bigger deal in the 80s than they are now. Um, And this album is definitely kind of more produced than what you'd heard from the Damned or the Dead Boys
Hmm.
um, up to this point. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was like what I did not like about punk was how it sounded shitty production wise.
Sure.
So listening to something like this was like, oh well, you don't have to sound like shit, and it can still be, pretty legit. So yeah, I mean, and once again, there's more of a rock and roll current to what they're doing.
Yeah, great band, and also quite, I guess, one of the progenitors, the unsung heroes of quote unquote goth, because they did have some of that imagery, and I
Hmm.
guess maybe not so much this record, but certainly their later ones. You alluded to one of them, of course, the album after this. Yeah, again, I'm just such a huge Stiv Bators fan. It's worth everyone checking out all his records, and he does a really good couple of power pop records too, which you should investigate. Um, and yeah, just an unlikely collection of people. I mean, the Damned and the Dead Boys not so. The Barracudas, they're kind of like the beach English version of a punkier Beach Boys in essence. So a strange combination of characters, but one that really, really worked well. So yeah, I ain't gonna disagree with that.
Cool. What you got next?
All right, so let's I think I've mentioned the Barracudas. It's not them, but it's kind of a similar-ish vibe. I'm going with Agent Orange and their 1981 album Living in Darkness. They were part of that scene, TSOL, The Adolescents, Social D, all those sort of well, I think Social D were from Fullerton actually, but they were LA bands and they had that kind of sound. And to describe them, I mean, they're not a hardcore band. I mean, they're sort of tagged with that weirdly, but they're a surf punk band, and I'm a huge fan of surf music. I think it has to have something to do with being from England and living in bloody freezing cold, wet, damp conditions. And you just listen to this and you sort of imagine yourself, in somewhere a little bit more glamorous. These guys, I feel like they've brought a bit of a post-punk darkness to the sound, um, kind of hence the album's title. And there's some really cool covers, as you would expect, from that genre, Pipeline and Mizzaloo and Mr. Moto. But then there's also songs like Everything Turns Grey, which was in that absolutely terrible film, Freddie Got Fingered, which less said the better. I first got into them through the Tony Hawk computer game because Bloodstains was on there. So definitely a very, very cool band. Don't know what to tell you. It's surf punk, you know. And if you like that sound, you're definitely going to like these guys. So that was my next choice.
Cool. I have not checked that album out. I'll have to spend some time with it.
Yeah, I think you'd
because I
like.
can appreciate that's one thing I like about and bands like Dick Dale and
Yeah,
even there was a band called Man or Astro Man
yeah.
that were from
Um,
Athens that had kind of a feel like that. They were high energy, almost punk, but I like the surf rock guitar tones, which
sure.
I've always felt were not too far removed from black metal because there's
Yeah,
a lot of
I
that
see that.
tremolo picking,
Tremolo. Yeah.
Yeah, if you I mean it's really just a blast beat away from being black metal.
Absolutely.
So I could give that a shot. I'll have to screw around and see if I can get some blast beat. I'll remix a Dick Dale song and put blast beats under it. Um, but yeah, so I'll check it out. It
I
sounds
think
interesting.
I think you would really like it. They haven't done many albums. I mean, they're one of those annoying bands that, unlike the Melvins, these guys have done like three albums in God Almighty, what, 40 odd years?
Right.
But it's the first two records. There's a follow-up to this called This Is a Voice, which is a bit more kind of new wavy, I guess, post-punk in a way, less dark, kind of more atmospheric. But that's also good. So definitely one to get into.
Cool. Well, speaking of not really putting out a lot of albums, my next band is from New Jersey and they didn't really put out a lot of albums. So I'm gonna, the ones they did made a big impact and then they were kind of repackaged and resold along the way. And while I do like their first album, their debut, I would say that I am instead gonna have to go with their second album, which is Earth AD, and I'm talking about the Misfits.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, I think it kind of goes with what was already mentioned with the precursor of Lords of the New Church being kind of a starting point for goth. Definitely the Misfits had an influence on death rock.
sure.
Um,
AFI as well.
yeah, sure. So
Yeah,
even newer, the new I guess AFI would be kind of almost like death rock revival at times.
sure.
Um, but yeah, so they had darker imagery. A lot of the songs on Walk Among Us are almost like pop punk. I think that these on Earth AD they dig in a little more and it's a little more aggressive.
Oh
So
God.
without crossing over into hardcore.
Well, they did feature Robo, of course, from
Yep.
Flag, who's a phenomenal drummer, and it always makes me laugh with the Misses. I love them. I'm like you. I think they're a great band. And this is a good record. But I saw a meme once that had said something along the lines of the Black Flag bars and the Misfits. What do you call it? That skull thing is basically like the live, laugh, love of the punk scene because it's
Right.
because it's so ubiquitous, those images, if you see someone with that, you know exactly where they're from. So, it's kind of a very and curious. I don't know because you're more of a metal guy than me. But is there a reason like that you get a lot of metal bands that don't really listen to a lot of punk yet they always seem to be into the Misfits?
Well, yeah, because Metallica was covering them.
Yeah, sure. Is
So
that the
that's
main?
probably their first exposure. And it's
Okay.
weird how that happens to where with Garage Days, people latched on to the Misfits, but
Yeah.
did not do the same with like Killing Joke, or it's not like you saw Budgie getting a huge
No,
push, or
no.
um, what happened with Diamond Head.
Holocaust or something like one of
Yeah, I
those.
mean,
Yeah.
Metallica was almost a direct ripoff of Diamond Head.
Yeah.
And those guys are, probably somewhere in the unemployment line, if not.
Yeah.
But I think that's the connection, and it's easy to see, I mean, when I saw them, the reunion, I guess 2 summers ago,
Hmm.
um, might have been three, but it seems like it was two, so I'll call it two.
Hmm.
Um, Fear opened and Megadeth opened. And
Okay.
that seemed like that was pretty much the cross section of the crowd, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't say that what they were doing was metal on Walk Among Us, but they were starting to kind of get aggressive like that on this album, without crossing it over into hardcore, you know.
Yeah, I mean, retain some of the speed there, but yeah, it'd be a bit of a stretch to compare this to say the Necros or something,
Right.
kind of a little bit. Yeah, it's still a little, it still has some tinges of melody there. It's not all out, but it's pretty quick, but we're not talking, yeah, as you say, the Necros or Negative Approach. It's a little bit different to that. And also the horror imagery as well is what distinguishes them from just a regular hardcore band. Uh,
Yeah, which is, when people are like, "Oh, well, punk is political." It's like, "Really?
no.
Well,
Yeah.
why do I have 20 eyes in my head and they're all the same?"
Yeah, quite.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Nice
All
one,
right,
man.
what you got?
All right. So I felt like Blighty, my homeland, should be represented on this list. And these guys are definitely not for everybody. I've gone for Crass, and they're an anarcho punk band. And they did live it how they spoke it, unlike Rage Against the Machine. These guys really, I mean, I think one of them still lives on a commune. And of course, they're best known. The style of their music, it's kind of like there's no doubting that these guys are English, especially the vocalist. And those early albums are kind of rudimentary. The drumming is incredibly so. But the album I've gone for is called Yes Sir, I Will, which was their 1983 record. And they were already starting to experiment by this stage. But this is just, it's almost like in a similar way that Flipper is sort of punk, but so avant-garde and weird. These guys are even more so. It's almost free-form improvisation. And the album is basically it's a virulent attack on Margaret Thatcher, surprise, surprise, and the then Falklands War, which was well, by that stage it had been over, but obviously the fallout from that was still resonating everywhere. And yeah, it's just all over the place, this record. But that's what, excuse me, that's what makes it such a fascinating listen. It's kind of almost jazz style instrumentation in places, but still with tinges of what they were doing on the first couple of records. And that's what really caught my attention. Whether you're into the politics, we're not there here to discuss that stuff, but I've always respected their integrity and their ethos. I love the imagery as well. And yeah, it's just a really curious record. If you want something that's like the complete opposite of say Walk Among Us with no melody whatsoever and just discordant and weird and fucked up and political and pissed off to hell, then check this album out. That's Crass with Yes Sir I Will.
Yeah, so I always like these guys. They definitely and there is a kind of anarcho punk stream of music that came along, like bands like Arctic Flowers, that kind of came alongside of like death rock.
Sure.
So there was some like interbreeding and typically it's a little darker. Crass gets a little darker sometimes than um, most of this type of thing. And I think there you can hear like their influence on a lot of like early crust punk, like Amoebics. Um, so yeah, so I definitely appreciate what they do, and they're a band that I need to give another listen to. Like I heard them back in the 90s, but when I was in the mood for that, I always ended up listening to like Death in June. So
Sure. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, as I say, very, very sort of shambolic in a way, but that's kind of part of their charm. If you like bands like this, although slightly different, you've got bands like Conflict, of course, Flux of Pink Indians, Subhumans. They sort of inspired a whole glut of what we now know as anarcho punk, and also a very good band called Zounds. So if you like what these guys are doing, there's a very good chance you like those too.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna bust through my next one pretty quick, and so we
Cool.
don't get zoomed. But I'm gonna say, this is an album we've kind of talked about. Definitely talked about this band. I think it's gonna make sense why I picked it because there is that kind of crossover into goth. But what's being done on this album, you can also hear how it got carried forward into the 90s by people like Danzig, and that is Changed Today by TSOL.
Hey. Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, I got probably one of my favorite records of the 80s, I would say, and a very underrated record from this band. If Jack Grisham was on this record, I can guarantee that a lot more people would be listening to it, which is a shame.
Right. All right,
Yeah.
what you got?
All right, man. Okay, so brilliant choice there, TSOL. Definitely check that out. And we're going to slowly bring this to a close with Operation Ivy, and their album Energy. And I absolutely loathe and detest with every fiber of my doing 99.9% of ska punk. I think it's total rubbish. And a lot of the stuff that was produced in the 90s, particularly so. But these guys were one of the godfathers of it, and there's just an attitude to it. There's a bit of hardcore in there. It's still got some of the bounciness, but it's not irritating. It's not Less Than Jake or one of those silly bands. It's got a little bit more punch to it. And of course, it's got the dude from Rancid, Tim Armstrong, I think he's called.
Uh-huh.
This is when he was. This is the only band you need to listen to that features him in my opinion. And yeah, just it's political, but I don't feel like the music that's really rammed down your throat. They're just the songs are so well written, and they were only around for a couple of years too. I believe they're on Lookout Records, um, which I don't think that's still around anymore. But yeah, just a super cool band, and again, there's not much of their discography to get into, so you can probably listen to it in about an hour, a couple of hours, I'd say. So yeah, definitely a favorite of mine, even though it's a genre I cannot stand. I think these guys probably do it better than all of those groups.
Right. So there, like I hate Rancid, but
Yeah.
I definitely respect what these guys do
Yeah.
in the 90s. I hung around a bunch of punk rock kids, and so I got this in my periphery,
Yeah.
and sometimes I would hear this album and didn't hate it. So, it
It's
was it
always a
was
good
worth
thing.
that. Yeah, so something maybe later down the road I can go back and revisit as a not 20 something. Um, so yeah, so my last pick is going to be a band that's from the 70s, but I think that this album is kind of them in their final form. It's
Cool.
produced by Bill Laswell. The band themselves is not necessarily crazy about it unless you're talking to Joey Ramone.
Yeah.
But I am going to go with Brain Drain by the Ramones.
Okay.
Um, it's darker, it's more melodic. Their songwriting was way advanced from where they came from, and they
Mm.
would kind of carry that into the last few albums they did. So,
Yeah.
I'm all about the songwriting and the hooks, and this album has this. I saw them on this tour twice.
Mm.
Um, Once on their own headlining, and then I saw them again. Um, they were playing a kind of a package tour that was also uh, Debbie Harry was on the bill, the Tom Tom Club,
Okay.
and another band that I wish I could remember. It might be the Tubes, but maybe not.
Mm.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice because it's not a very well liked record, is it? It's a strange album. Definitely way more melodic. Even more than what's that album? End of a Century, is it? With Baby I Love You and all that kind of thing. It's even more melodic. And famous has got Pet Cemetery and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I like it. I like all those 80s Ramones albums. I think they get unfairly overlooked because people are just like, oh, well, the first four and that's it.
Right.
Uh,
And it's like, well, what else would be the greatest punk album of 1989?
Yeah, exactly, right?
You
You
got to
know,
think about where music was at, and they kind of rose above, and they didn't fall into obscurity. I mean, I
yeah.
think it's not a sellout, I don't think.
No, absolutely not.
If you're in a horror movie soundtrack, I don't consider that a sellout.
God, I mean, it's not like they're on
Because
bloody.
then if that was the case, you'd be including 45 Grave and Bauhaus and
I mean, Christ, they weren't on bloody Top Gun or something.
no.
They're on an obscure
Stephen King movie, yeah.
Stephen King horror film. Sorry, I mean, it's
Which
not
was
really.
pretty good for when it came out.
Yeah, it's
Had
fun.
Fred Gwynn, Herman Munster
Gwen,
was an old
cool.
man.
Yeah, it's just fun. I mean, I think people, sort of write off the Ramones after a certain point. I just think it's stupid. I mean, seriously,
I don't like their album of like 60s covers. So once they get
just
into like hippie music, then we're parting ways. But
it's perfunctory, really.
right.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, Too Tough to Die. This one, that album is it Animal Boy, I think, as well. Yeah, some good stuff there. So check it out, people.
Cool. So yeah, so there we go. Our top five 80s punk albums. Um, I guess what it only makes sense that we do next would be our top five 80s metal albums.
Okay.
Which, there's some good stuff in there. I know that's gonna be it's a little more of a challenge for you than it will be for
Yeah,
me.
I've got
The
some good
challenge
ones.
for me is gonna be narrowing it down.
It's
Um,
gonna be trying to find some.
yeah.
I'm
Narrowing
sure
it
I will.
down. Because yeah, I mean, if you read the blog I do for Abysmal Hymns, I just went through and reviewed all the Dio albums last year. So I bet, I have no problem finding some 80s metal. There won't be much hair metal on there. Maybe I'll put one, but I don't know. There's too much competition. Um, it was an
Yeah,
interesting time, and some bands rose to the occasion. And once again, it's kind of like the punk
yeah,
list that we just did.
sure.
If those albums did not exist, we would not have the albums we have today. So,
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
for every Entombed album, there had to be a Judas Priest. So,
Oh yeah, absolutely, man, for sure.
well, cool. Well, we will see you next week for that.